Welcome, everybody, to the NFL Show on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. The NFL Show, as always, is brought to you by Replenishing Care and Technologies. Make sure you check them out at rcandt.com. I am your co-host for the NFL Show, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I'd like to welcome in my co-host, NFL beat writer Sam Teets. How you doing, Sam?
I'm doing great, Mike. Excited for some football tonight.
Yeah, there's actually going to be football tonight, and if you'd have told us this a couple months ago, I think both of us would have highly doubted it.
Yeah, if you had said this a couple of months ago, it certainly seemed like people were trending towards the idea of just canceling the season altogether. But things have definitely picked up since then. It seems like we're going to get through at least most of the year. I expect the full season at this point.
Yeah, and tonight's matchup is a matchup of a great playoff game from last year. And it's been a mere 8 months since Patrick Mahomes led Kansas City from a 24-0 hole to defeat Deshaun Watson and the Houston Texans in a divisional round battle that basically propelled Kansas City to the Super Bowl. Now, the Houston Texans are a lot different team now. No more Carlos, no more DeAndre Hopkins. The big question here is the running game with David Johnson coming into this game, because what we saw last year is the way to beat the Chiefs is to control the clock, to run the ball, especially between the tackles. And the big question here is, does David Johnson have enough left to get that done, Sam?
Well, I was going to pose this question to you. Is it crazy to say that David Johnson is the deciding factor in tonight's game? Because for as much trouble as he had in Arizona, I think you're right. It's going to come down to whether they can run the ball or not. If they can't run the ball and they're totally one-dimensional, I don't see the Houston Texans being able to win this game. I do think David Johnson's health is probably a big or key factor for the Texans in the entire season, but I just don't know if I trust him, especially after the last 2 years in Arizona.
Well, I think it's not so much that do we trust him, because we know he's a great running back. The problem is, do we trust that he's going to be healthy? And I think that is huge. And I think the biggest matchup to me, no matter who's running the ball here, is Chris Jones and Frank Clark against that Texans offensive line. Outside of Laramie Tunsil, the Houston offensive line is still very much suspect. I know last year Deshaun Watson was sacked on 8.2% of his dropbacks. To compare that, Patrick Mahomes was sacked just 3.4% of his pass attempts. And unfortunately for Houston, they have a problem in the form of Kansas City's defensive line. The unit is maybe the deepest on the entire roster of a really deep team, led by great pass rushers in Frank Clark and Chris Jones. And I just think my worry here is, even if they can run the ball, when they attempt to pass it, that the Chiefs will just feast early and often on that Texans offensive line.
That's what I would expect to happen, because Deshaun Watson got sacked 4 times in the divisional round against Kansas City. So he's been beat up by his line in the past, and that was when Chris Jones, who's arguably their best pass rusher, was still beat up and hurt. I don't even know if he played in the divisional round last year. And now you got him back at full strength. You got Frank Clark, who battled injuries last year. He's now fully healthy. These are 2 Pro Bowl caliber pass rushers who are going to get 12 to 15 sacks a year. And Deshaun Watson, he's got to do a lot of running and a lot of scrambling to carry this Texan team throughout the season, because that offensive line, like you said, it's tragic. It's not good.
And see, I think it's really easy to say this comes down to whether David Johnson can run the ball or not. But, I mean, not just David Johnson running the ball, but at some point you got to complete passes during that drive, because, you know, at some point you're going to get a penalty. Something's going to happen. It's going to be hard to just run the ball the entire game and win it. And the other problem here is Tyreek Hill and Mecole Hardman against the Texans secondary. And I think the reality is that the receivers for Kansas City are much, much faster than the Texans secondary, and they magnify their speed by being great route runners, quick ends, out cuts. And remember this, the Chiefs scored 51 points in less than 3 quarters against Houston in January, and Houston's not better in the secondary than what they were last year.
No, I make the argument they're potentially worse. I mean, their best corners right now are Bradley Roby, Vernon Hargraves, and Lonnie Johnson. These are a bunch of early first, second round picks who just haven't worked out on other teams who are now in Houston. So you're basically playing with scraps at corner. Your best defensive back is probably Justin Reed. Your other safety is Eric Murray. I just don't see this being – I mean, this is really – besides Reed, it's not a starting caliber NFL secondary. It really isn't. So I don't know how you're going to go out there and try to contain guys like Tyreek Hill, Sammy Watkins, and Mecole Hardman, who have world-class speed, because you don't have the cover peaches to even cover one of those guys.
All right, we got Travis Kelce. Clyde Edwards-Helaire makes his pro debut tonight against these Texans linebackers. Now, Houston has a really good linebacking core, at least solid. They're excellent against the run and better than average at covering fullbacks and slow tight ends. But the problem here is the Chiefs don't employ a slow tight end. And when you look at this matchup, I just don't see how they cover him. When I look at this game, outside of the fact that Deshaun Watson is on the field for Houston, I really don't see a way they can win this game. And I think it's going to be a nightmare for them trying to cover Travis Kelce, who they couldn't cover in the playoffs. And now you've added Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who was going to be held to defend in the open field.
Yeah, I mean, Kelce went for 134 yards and 10 catches and 3 touchdowns in the divisional round. So he dominated these Texans linebackers. Now, the Texans are confident in Zach Cunningham and Bernard McKinney because they've given them extensions recently. I'm like Zach Cunningham more than McKinney, but at the same point, you're right. They're not primarily coverage linebackers. So these guys going with Travis Kelce, who's maybe the best receiving tight end in the NFL, that really doesn't fly. I don't think that's going to work out well. I'm curious about Clyde Edwards-Helaire because we haven't seen him play in an NFL game yet, obviously with the short offseason. There seems to be so much hype around this guy. I wonder if he can ever live up to it because a lot of people are talking that he's going to be like the next Kareem Hunt or Brian Westbrook or something like that. I don't know if he's going to be that necessarily immediately because everyone seems to expect him to come in and make this superstar impact right away. I don't know if he can live up to expectations.
Now, I think the game comes down to Deshaun Watson because he has to play huge for them to even have a chance here. And to me, the matchup to watch tonight is Deshaun Watson against the Honey Badger, Tyrann Mathieu. Mathieu, one of the best safeties in the NFL. I think he could, if he could stay healthy, be a legitimate defensive player of the year candidate. And if the Chiefs' defense is working well, primarily the corners are doing their jobs, Mathieu, that gives him kind of free reign to utilize his instincts against Watson. And these two duking out, I think, would be really interesting. But I think in the end, Deshaun Watson has to play out of his mind for them to have a chance in this game. And really last year, he did for a quarter and a half, but it's hard to continue to play at that level for 4 quarters against this defense and this pass rush.
Yeah, and to give you an idea of what he did last year, 388 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 37 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown. And that wasn't enough to win the game. Tyrann Mathieu was a former Houston Texan. He was there for a couple of years. I think they probably have a good feel for what he's capable of. They probably know what to expect from him. But at the same point, you're right. If the Texans and their wide receivers from now do not have DeAndre Hopkins, and they've had Brandon Cooks, he's questionable. He's a game time decision. So you don't know if you're going to have him or not. I mean, that leaves Will Fuller as your top guy pretty much. Will Fuller, and then you got Randall Cobb. It's not really a great unit to be going out there. And even going against a weakened Kansas City Chiefs secondary doesn't have a lot of great cover corners. They've got a strong safety group, and Tyrann Mathieu is going to wreak havoc on your game plan.
Yeah, but the one thing here, even if the wide receivers are great, I think this is huge what happens with Will Fuller. I mean, he's given an opportunity to really shine now that DeAndre Hopkins has been shipped out to the desert. Can he take advantage of that? And when you look at Kansas City, I think a glaring weakness to me is the cornerback position. You got Charvarius Ward, who I think has proven himself to be an above-average corner over the last 2 seasons. But no other cornerback on this roster can even boast 1 year of quality coverage production. Antonio Hamilton has been a career special teams guy. He now takes over for one of the best slot corners in the NFL, Kendall Fuller. And meanwhile, Rashad Fenton must start in place of the suspended Bashaud Breeland in a role on the outside he's never played before in the NFL. So this is the one thing. When you look at that, if Cooks can play with Cooks, Fuller, and even Randall Cobb, I really think Deshaun Watson could put up some points tonight. Whether it'll be enough to win the game, I don't know. But I think there's a huge problem in Kansas City with the cornerback position.
Well, yeah, and the issues for them is going to be the speedy guys like Will Fuller, because you can sometimes bring Tyrann Mathieu down and put him in the slot if you absolutely have to. Then you play Juan Thornhill and Daniel Sorensen at true safety spots, and maybe keep Matthew in the slot for a little while. But Will Fuller is not the kind of guy you can do that to. You can't cover him outside or in the slot with a slower corner because he's got the speed. Of course, the question is the health. Whenever Will Fuller plays, the Houston Texans are almost always favorites because when he's played alongside DeAndre Hopkins, the offense, they have been phenomenal. But now you don't have Hopkins anymore. You cannot have Will Fuller continuously getting hurt like he has been throughout the first 4 years of his career.
All right, so when you look at the game, the point spread is 9.5, I believe. Would you take the points tonight in the Texans?
No, I don't know if I would.
So you would give the 9.5 point?
I think I would give the 9.5 points. I don't think I would take it because I just don't. I don't feel like it's a smart move to do that. I don't feel like it's right to go that direction.
All right. The thing that scares me there is the fact that maybe the Chiefs jump up big early, and with the lack of corners, Deshaun Watson puts up some numbers, and maybe they can cover the 9.5 points right at the end of the game.
Yeah, you think about score like towards the final 2 minutes or something like that. They won't win the game, but they could get within. I see what you're saying there. I personally don't know about that. I really think this will be a high-scoring game, but I think Kansas City will just outlast them. I think Kansas City will be pouring on throughout the game. I don't think there will be any slowing down.
Now, does the fact that only 22% of the stadium can be filled tonight in Kansas City, does that help Houston or does that hurt Houston?
I think it gives Houston something because the Chiefs have one of the best home crowds in the NFL alongside with Seattle. We talked about this before. For not just for fans or viewers on TV, but also for teams, it makes a big difference. Kansas City is one of the loudest stadiums in the league. You get rid of that noise, and suddenly it's much easier to communicate for the Houston Texans players. It's probably not a significant deal, but at the same point, it's something. It gives them a little bit more of an edge against the Kansas City team that is used to having a huge advantage at home.
All right, so when we look at this, the lack of crowd, I mean, what do you think this does to the NFL going forward? Because I know that on about 4 different platforms, including Facebook Live right now, we've got people telling us that the NFL is dead. Is the NFL dead? Is there any concern that the NFL, because of this, gets smaller than what it was?
I mean, the TV numbers have already been going down over the last couple of years. It's kind of been happening naturally. So I would assume that the numbers will go down again because it's not the same viewing experience. I mean, I'm always used to when I watch football games having that crowd noise in the background. It's just kind of part of the experience. And especially if you're going to go to a game in general, you want to have that full thing. You don't want to go to a stadium where it's mostly empty. So I think, yeah, it will probably have an impact on their numbers this season. But at the same point, will it affect the long-term longevity of the NFL? No, I don't think so. I don't think the NFL is really that worried. If the NFL was really worried about this, they wouldn't be giving out record contracts left and right to players this offseason.
So do you think the fact that there will be a nod to social justice, do you think that hurts, helps, or – I mean, to me, I think that's 50-50. I think no matter which way they were to go on that, whether ignoring it or doing it, it's going to piss off half the people.
Yeah, exactly, because there's people have already made up their minds how they feel about it. And so there's one group that's going to be mad if you do it no matter what, and there's one group who's going to be supportive if you do it. And if you didn't do it, people say, oh, you really don't care. See, it's the NFL we always told you about. It's all about the money. And if the NFL goes for it and does do it, the other people will say, oh, look at this. It's a pushover league. They're just going with this because they have to. And it's going to be negative either way. No one's going to be – they can't possibly make everyone happy with the situation.
Well, I would say this. They're doing it because they feel like they have to.
Oh, yeah. They're not doing it for the right reasons or anything like that. They're doing it because they feel like this is the movement of this society right now, and they feel like they have to get on board with this.
Yeah. But, hey, over the last week and a half, 2 weeks, we broke down every division. We've told you who we thought would be in the playoffs. Who's your Super Bowl prediction for this year?
I feel like I can't go against Kansas City. I know that the odds of a team repeating as champions are getting back are very low because we've seen it happen. It hasn't happened very often in the past. Yeah, I think it was the last team to do it, at least from the NFC side. But I'm going to take Kansas City on the AFC. And on the AFC side of things, I think it's much closer. It's much more competitive at the top. The 3 teams I'm looking at really are the Saints, Buccaneers, and even the Seattle Seahawks. I give the Seahawks an edge. I know you're not as high on them as I am. But I'll take the Saints. I'll give it to the Saints this one year. I think they finally actually get over this hump they've been having and finally get to the playoffs and maybe have a shot at winning a Super Bowl.
Well, I think you're crazy. I think there's too many holes in Seattle, number one, to really be a serious contender with all these other teams. I mean, when I look at Seattle, I mean, there's issues. There's issues on the offensive line because there always is. I think there's issues on defense too, Sam.
No, defensive line. I know what you're talking about. Defensive line itself, they don't really have a true sack artist up there. So that's probably the big issue. They're not going to be able to force turnovers, not going to be able to get the quarterbacks at any point in games. I think that could be the biggest issue for them. The secondary is pretty good. The defensive line isn't.
Right, so who would be dark horse in each conference?
Dark horse in each conference. For the AFC side of things, I would say I'll go with the Colts. I like the Indianapolis Colts. You've talked me into them over the course of this summer. I think the Colts, if they have that offensive line that's been so dominant, if they get that running game going, we saw this in San Francisco last year. The quarterback doesn't have to make every play to get your team to the Super Bowl if you have a strong running game. I think the Colts stand a chance in the AFC. And on the AFC side of things, I would probably go with the Philadelphia Eagles because they got a proven coaching staff, they got a proven front office, and I like Carson Wentz more than most people.
Every play. Yeah, I think most people like Carson Wentz. I just think you've been talking to Sam McGinnis too much.
That's true. Maybe Sam McGinnis make me think the world hates Carson Wentz, but
yeah. So when I look at it, I agree with you on the Colts, and I probably would agree on the Eagles too. Those would be the two teams. I don't know that. To me, the NFC seems to be like 5 or 6 teams where any of them you could see doing it. The AFC is one to me where it looks like just Baltimore and Kansas City. But the Kansas City thing, the thing that still worries me is I still think you can run them between the tackles. I think their defensive line's really good when they rush the passer. It was a defense that was number 1 from weeks 11 through 17 at the end of last season, so that's hard to overlook. But I still think the lack of cornerbacks could really hurt this team. And when I look at Baltimore, I'm still not convinced on Lamar Jackson. So if I had to pick a team outside of those two, I think the two teams to watch out for are the Indianapolis Colts and the Buffalo Bills. My problem with the Colts is Philip Rivers is older than dirt. So what's he got left? And my problem with Buffalo is Josh Allen, and can it be consistent? Because if Josh Allen can be consistent, they're going to have a run game, and they've got a complete roster outside of the quarterback position to me. Stephon Diggs was a huge addition. So if Josh Allen was just slightly above average and didn't turn the ball over more than 8 or 9 times, I think the Bills are a team that could be a real threat.
Let's put it this way. If you switched like Deshaun Watson and Josh Allen, you switch their situations, put Deshaun Watson in Buffalo, I feel much more confident about the Bills making a deep run to the playoffs. I just don't see it because of Josh Allen. And we talked about this in the past. I'm one of the bigger Josh Allen doubters I think I know because I don't see him developing into a starting quarterback. I don't see him being in Buffalo in 3 years down the line.
He's already a starting quarterback, Sam. You don't see him developing into
you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be a franchise. Yeah, I don't think he'll be a franchise quarterback long term.
Yeah, but my thing with the AFC is I find it a stretch really including anybody else in the conversation out of those or on top of those 4 teams.
Yeah, I don't think there's anyone else who I'd really put in there. I mean, I'll always float Pittsburgh around in the idea just because I'm a Steelers fan. And I feel like if everything clicked, it would be good for Pittsburgh. But at the same point, that's a huge question mark. Everything would have to go right for them to actually have a chance to make it.
I think you're crazy because I think this. I think if everything went right, I think the Bengals have a better chance of getting to the Super Bowl than the Pittsburgh Steelers would.
Nah, you're crazy. You're the one who's being crazy in this situation, Mike. That's absolutely not true.
The Bengals actually have legitimate wide receivers, a legitimate running back, all things the Pittsburgh Steelers don't have. They've got – now Pittsburgh has one of the best defenses in football, but there is no reason to think Big Ben can play 16 games healthy at a high level because it's been a few years since he has. So I would take Joe Mixon. Who's Pittsburgh's running back?
James Conner.
Okay. You want James Conner or Joe Mixon?
Well, let me ask you this question. When was the last time you had A.J. Green play half a season or play a full season of football?
Number one, if A.J. Green doesn't play, the Bengals have T. Higgins. They've got Tyler Boyd. I mean, they're not.
T. Higgins has never played a snap in the NFL.
Who hasn't?
T. Higgins has never played a snap in the NFL. Tyler Boyd's the only guy you've got who's had over 1,000 yards in the last 2 years.
Okay, now who do the Steelers have at wide receiver? How many guys do they have with over 1,000 yards in the last couple seasons?
One, same as you. One.
Really? Who was that guy for you guys?
Juju, 2 years ago.
2 years ago, Juju had 1,000 yards receiving. A.J. Green's had, 10,000 yard receiving year? So I would say there's a better chance that A.J. Green pulls it off than Juju Smith-Schuster. And see, Steve Rizzer agrees with me. Pittsburgh skill guys are bad outside of Juju, and it's true. And the Pittsburgh Steelers' offensive line is not the line they had of 3 years ago. And there, yeah, Steve read my mind.
Yeah, he's right, though. I agree on that. The offensive line is much weaker now than it was 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, so I think it's just Pittsburgh Steeler bias. I think the Bengals are probably going to win 5 games this year. I'm just telling you, the ceiling in Cincinnati is much higher than it is in Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh has serious issues because in another year or so, or in the next few weeks, they're going to realize that they need to go out and find a quarterback quickly. And those are hard to find.
Yeah, but like I said, I was the one who said if everything goes right. That's saying everything has to go right for Pittsburgh to make the playoffs. And I don't know.
You know what? If everything goes right, everybody makes it to the Super Bowl. The thing is things don't go right. And a lot of getting to the Super Bowl or a lot of winning a championship at any level is just luck. Who gets hurt, who doesn't. And I'll tell you, you need a lot to go right when you're depending on a quarterback who's been beat up for the last 3 years, who basically admitted he was an alcoholic. I mean, come on. It's not like he's Tom Brady and he's taking care of himself all the time. You know, Big Ben is a guy that Big Ben's tailing off because of Big Ben. Tom Brady will tail off because he just got old.
Yeah, that's fair. But I'm feeling lucky, Mike. I feel like this could be a good run here.
The way you're smiling tells me you don't think. That would be like me coming on here and say, well, the Bengals are my dark horse. They're not. I think Joe Burrow is going to put up tremendous numbers, but their coaching staff sucks. I think the defense will be better. I think the Bengals are going to win somewhere between 5 and 9 games. 9 is if everything goes right. And for the Pittsburgh Steelers, if everything goes right, they win 10 or 11 games, and they still get bounced early in the playoffs because they don't have enough weapons on offense. And now Greg is a Browns fan, so now he thinks they're going to win 9 games. So
all of us are saying
I'm not saying that because I just said I expect 5 wins. If everything goes right, the Bengals could win the Super Bowl. Nothing has ever gone right in Cincinnati. I know it's not going to go right. Joe Burrow's probably going to get hurt on the first snap he takes. He'll be like Greg Cook, and he'll just disappear into anonymity. And 30 years from now, old people will be saying, just think if he'd have been all right and played all through his career. Now, Steve Rizzer gives you a shot to the playoffs. Steve says that he's got the Steelers going 9-7, barely making the playoffs because of their defense. I can see that also. I just cannot see a magical Super Bowl run behind Big Ben because last year with the Duck, they almost made the playoffs. They would have been a playoff team if the extra playoff team would have been there. And I think, what do you think of the extra playoff team? Do you think it's a good idea or a bad idea?
Look, I don't necessarily love it because now you're limiting it to one team gets a bye. So I think the competition for that one seed is going to be a little bit lower. Because you used to have a situation where you would have 3 or 4 teams in the final week potentially competing for a top 2 seed in a bye. And now you're in a situation where maybe it'll just be 1 or 2 teams actually competing for the bye week at the end of the year. And we'll have less meaningful football games in week 17.
Well, I think it's stupid because I think in the next 2 years, you're going to see a playoff team at 7-9, which we have seen a 7-9 playoff team win a game before, but it's still a joke. Greg Gorecki loved Greg Cook, and it was a shame what happened to him. Do you know about Greg Cook, Sam?
I do not. Enlighten me.
Sam. Come on, Sam. How could you not know about Greg Cook, the greatest quarterback to ever play in the NFL?
I feel that's not accurate.
Well, do you think Bill Walsh is an idiot?
No.
Bill Walsh said he was the greatest quarterback he ever coached.
Oh.
You there, Sam?
Still there?
Sam. I'm still here, Sam. Are you there? So
yeah,
have you ever even heard?
Just keep flickering in and out.
Have you ever heard of Greg Cook?
I have not heard of Greg Cook.
Really? Jeez. All right. It's time for the history lesson of the day for me and Greg Gorecki, since I know Greg knows who he was. But Cook is a guy that played at the University of Cincinnati, actually threw for 554 yards in a game at the University of Cincinnati. Cook, the Bengals were created in 68. Going off of memory here, he gets drafted by the Bengals in 1969, and he was a dude that basically took an expansion team. In 68, the Bengals starting quarterback was like John Stoffen, Dewey Warren, guys like that. Not ripping on John Stoffen because I actually had him on the Legends show, but Cook was a dude that, as a rookie, had a 17.5 yard per completion, which is still a record that stands today, which means every completed pass, all his completed pass averaged almost 18 yards every game. The offensive coordinator in Cincinnati, and actually Greg Cook is one of the reasons why the West Coast offense came to fruition, because Greg Cook in 1969, the Bengals came out and they beat like the Chargers and Sid Gilman. They beat the Raiders. They won 2 of their first games, and then they played the Kansas City Chiefs, who I think Cook got hurt against the Chiefs. He came back, finished the season, but he was never the same. He had a shoulder injury that back then they couldn't fix. So he played like 2 or 3 more years, but never really did get back on the field. He attempted to play for 2 or 3 more years. But since the Bengals lost Greg Cook, he comes back in 7. He can't play. The Bengals start the season out 1-6, and their starting quarterback was Virgil Carter, who did not have a lot of arm strength. The other quarterback was Sam Weiss, who would later take them to the Super Bowl in 1988 as the head coach. And what they did is they developed a West Coast offense because Virgil Carter's arm strength was next to nothing for an NFL quarterback. So that's where Bill Walsh came up with the quick pass concepts. It's kind of derived a little bit off of Sid Gilman and what he did in the 60s, only Sid Gilman was more of a vertical passing guy. So between Gilman and Bill Walsh's West Coast offense, which probably should have been called the Midwest offense or the Ohio River offense, basically you get the offenses that you get today. Everything was kind of derived from there, whether it's air raid or whatever it is run today. But Greg Cook, Bill Walsh once said that the best quarterback he ever coached by far was Greg Cook. He said he had the most natural talent of anybody had ever seen. Cook was the rookie of the year in 69. And remember, he played half of that season with an arm that he had to shoot up with cortisone to even be able to play. And Bill Walsh is the guy that actually, he was the offensive coordinator for Kenny Anderson. He was the offensive coordinator, head coach for Joe Montana. So when Bill Walsh says Greg Cook was better than Kenny Anderson and Joe Montana, and he was better than anybody he ever saw, it's hard to ignore. And I know all kind of older guys, because I wasn't old. I was just born in 1968. I didn't really see Greg Cook. But, I mean, just from listening to my dad talk about Greg Cook and other people that were older, you know, when you look at that, I mean, there has to be something to that, especially when Bill Walsh says it. Now, Greg Gorecki says the Bengals were almost a 500 team with Cook quarterback before his injury. Actually, I think the Bengals before that injury were like 2-1. And they had beaten the Raiders, who were one of the best teams in the NFL. And I think they either beat the Chiefs or lost a close game to the Chiefs where he got hurt in that game. So the thing that you always have to wonder here is, with the Bengals, a lot of people don't realize Bill Walsh was the offensive coordinator for Paul Brown in the 70s up till 1975. 1975, the Bengals were 11-3. They lost 31-28 to the Oakland Raiders. And what happened was Paul Brown retired, and he had a choice of Bill Walsh or Bill Tiger Johnson. Bill Tiger Johnson was a longtime assistant, really good football coach, and Paul Brown decided to go with Tiger Johnson. So the rest is history, because 6 years later, Bill Walsh is beating Paul Brown's Bengals in the Super Bowl. And when you know the Brown family, even though I'm a Bengals fan, you got to get a little bit of a chuckle out of it. But the thing here is, if Greg Cook stays healthy, how does that change history? Because the Bengals were a playoff team in 73. They were 10-4. They lost 34-16 to the Dolphins. In 75, they lose by 3 to the Raiders. 76, they barely missed the playoffs in a 7-3 loss to Pittsburgh. 77, they barely missed the playoffs by losing 21-17, I think it was, at the Astrodome in Houston. So if Greg Cook is healthy, and he's the quarterback from 1969 to 1982. You could even have a point where the Bengals may win a Super Bowl in the 70s, maybe a couple, because everything I see, read, and watch film, Greg Cook was as good as anybody that ever played the game. But the other thing that leads to, if Greg Cook is this unbelievable stud, does that change Bill Walsh's attitude on not Bill Walsh, but Mike Brown or Paul Brown's attitude on who the head coach should be in 1975? Or does it end up with Greg Cook playing against Bill Walsh in Super Bowl 16? Because Cook would have only been 33 years old, about the same age Kenny Anderson was at that time. And also, what would have happened to Kenny Anderson then? Because Kenny Anderson probably never gets drafted by the Bengals in the 3rd round in 1971 if Greg Cook's healthy.
Yeah, he would have got to go play somewhere else. That was really my big question, is you would take him over Ken Anderson then.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when Bill Walsh tells me this guy was better than Joe Montana, yeah, would you take Joe Montana over Kenny Anderson? Even though I think Montana and Anderson were a lot alike, Montana had a little bit of something that outside of Tom Brady, maybe John Elway, not many guys have ever had. So, I mean, the biggest what if in the history of the NFL to me is what if Greg Cook would have not gotten hurt? Because you may all of a sudden, maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers don't win 4 Super Bowls in the 70s. Maybe they win 2 or 3. The Bengals win 2 or 3. And I mean, that's not that hard to comprehend because if you remember, the Steelers always struggled with the Bengals. They usually would skim by them in the early 70s, mid 70s. So maybe those 14-10 and 21-17 losses by the Bengals all of a sudden are wins. And then you're flipping who's even the playoff team. And that's not a shot on the Steelers because I think people forget how great the Bengals teams of the 70s were. I mean, you had a defensive backfield, Tommy Casanova, Lamar Parrish, Ken Riley. I mean, 2 or 3 should be in the Hall of Fame. And Casanova, if he doesn't decide to be a doctor 5 years into his career, I mean, he would probably be a Hall of Fame safety. On top of that, you had Mike Reed from Penn State, who joined the Bengals, I think, in 70 or 71. There was one of the best defensive tackles of the 70s who retired after 1974 or 75 to write songs in, Nashville, which worked out because the dudes won like 35 Grammys. So
yeah, I mean,
I've got a lot of what ifs there, but that's what a Bengals.
Yeah, no, you're right though, because the Bengals had. I mean, that was a much more competitive rivalry. I think today. I mean, back then, than I think what you have today necessarily between some of the teams in the AFC North. I think it would have been. You're right.
I mean, you had Swan and Stallworth with the Steelers. You had Bob Trumpy, who was probably one of the first 5 or 6 guys that was tight end that could stretch the field. You had Isaac Curtis. I mean, the running game wasn't great in Cincinnati, but the defense was extremely good. You had a guy like Coy Bacon. Coy Bacon, one of the most underrated pass rushers in NFL history. So when you look at that, and you look at the fact that in 1975, I mean, the Bengals lose 31-28 at Oakland. I mean, you can't tell me a guy like Greg Cook couldn't have switched the way that game went, because that was a game where the Bengals are down 31-14 in the fourth quarter. Anderson throws a couple touchdown passes. It's 31-28. And then I believe Anderson throws either an interception or Trumpy dropped a pass while the Bengals were driving to actually win the game. So there's a lot of things in NFL history that could be changed just by one thing being a little bit different. And I would say probably for almost every team in the NFL, things change. I mean, what if Tom Brady does it? What if somebody else drafts Tom Brady in those first 6 rounds? And
you change everything.
The Browns drafting Greg Gorecki, Tom Brady would have been retired years ago.
Yeah, it would have made a huge impact. I mean, there's no way to tell how much it would have spiraled out and how much it would have changed the league.
Yeah, but I don't think there's any doubt that it could have changed it. I mean, if you look at it, the New England Patriots, I think, were the best team in football in 1976. You get the bad penalty call against Sugar Bear Hamilton. Without that, the Patriots probably go to the Super Bowl in 1976, and they would have beat the Vikings. There's a lot of things here that, you change the tuck rule call. The Raiders win that game, changes who wins it. I mean, the thing is, there's so many little things here, but I think that's what makes the NFL and sports in general so great. Because when they say any given Sunday, it's any given second. Something can happen. I mean, 2005. I mean, I don't even know too many Steeler fans that believe that Steelers team would have beat the Bengals if Carson Palmer doesn't get hurt. I mean, because the Bengals.
Right. If you'd been in there, it would have been.
Yeah, a month before that, the Bengals went to Pittsburgh and beat the Steelers.
Yeah, they had a lot of momentum, but the Bengals had the momentum going into that game.
Yeah, and you had the long pass, and that ends up being a field goal. If it's Carson Palmer at the helm, that's a touchdown probably. And Carson Palmer's career was changed by that because even though it was only 15 years ago, medical science world was nowhere near what it is now. And I think that Carson Palmer, there was definitely a change in the way he moved in the pocket after that injury.
Well, yeah, I think you can tell from watching that in the subsequent years. I mean, he really had to adjust to it. It took him a couple seasons to get back to where he kind of wanted to be in terms of what he was performing on the field.
It took him probably 7 years until he got with the Cardinals again, until he looked like anything even remotely similar to what he looked like in 2005.
No, you're right. It absolutely did. He was not the same player after that, and it took him a while to get to a new head coach and just find the right position for him.
All right. Greg Gorecki, if the Browns had drafted Warren Moon, they may have won the Super Bowl as well, but nobody drafted him. And when he finally came to the NFL, he made the Pro Bowl 9 times. But I will tell you this. We're talking about the Cleveland Browns that are probably not going to win the Super Bowl, Greg. And Warren Moon never won a Super Bowl anywhere he went. He did win 4 or 5 Grey Cups in Edmonton with the Eskimos. So, and I think this. I think Bernie Kosar was a damn good quarterback. I think the Browns' problem in 86, 87, 89, all 3 of those years, even if they beat the Broncos, I think those 49er teams that they would have had to play, or that Redskins team they would have had to play, they probably lose to. I think their best chance to win it would have been Super Bowl 22 if they would have played that Redskins team. But I think the NFC as a whole was just a lot better than the AFC back then. So I don't think the Browns would have won a Super Bowl, but I do think the Browns, if they had Warren Moon instead of Bernie Kosar, would have made it to a Super Bowl.
When Warren Moon going undrafted, that's another big one. What if he had been drafted by a team? What if he had started in the league much earlier than he did? That kind of would have changed a lot of things potentially.
Who had the first pick in 1979? Does Greg know? Hell, it might have been the Bengals because they were like 3-13 or 4-12 every year in the late 70s. And that's the thing. Warren Moon wasn't drafted because he was black. Back then, that was racist because Warren Moon could play. And everybody got to see him on a national stage, take the Washington Huskies to the Rose Bowl, beat the Michigan Wolverines. He played great in that game. I think they won it 27-20. So, yeah, he was drafted at 70. Who had the first pick in the 78 draft, Sam?
78, it was the Oilers. They took Earl Campbell.
Okay, well, you can't dispute that. So who went number 2?
That was Kansas City took defensive end Art Still.
Damn, Art's still pretty damn good, too. You can't really argue with that one either. Who's number 3?
New Orleans takes Wes Chandler.
Damn, he was really good, too. Who's number 4?
We might have it here. The Jets take Chris Ward, tackle.
Well, he was pretty damn good, too. Who's number 5?
Buffalo takes running back Terry Miller.
There you go. He should have went number 5 to the Buffalo Bills. It's also close to Canada.
Yeah, would have worked out for him.
Well, how about this? If Warren Moon goes to the Buffalo Bills in 1978, the Buffalo Bills were damn good by 1981. Really, 1980, they lost the – 1980-81 Bills may have made a Super Bowl, may have won a Super Bowl with Warren Moon. Joe Ferguson was a solid quarterback, but he wasn't Warren Moon. And the thing is, in 1980, Buffalo lost by like 6 points to San Diego at San Diego. You could have changed that. I don't think they beat the Raiders, but in 1981, the Bengals slipped by the Bills 28-21 in a really close game where I actually thought the Bills were better than the Chargers that year because defensively they were better than the Chargers. So if you got Warren Moon playing in that game, maybe it changes.
Yeah, there you go. There's another example of how things could have really changed by one simple move.
Yeah, and really those first 4 picks were all solid. It's when you get to number 5 and it's Terry Miller, you wonder about it.
Yeah, James Lofton was number 6, so it was pretty good.
You could say the same thing about the Jets because if the Jets pick him at 4, the Jets in 1981, 82 were a really good football team. 81, they lost to the Bills in a close game. Let's see. Greg's got something here. The Browns drafted Clay Matthews 12th as well, but you have a point about the Bills. Well, I think this. Once you get past about the first 2 or 3 picks, Warren Moon should have been picked at least. So I think Clay Matthews was a really good linebacker, but I'm pretty sure Greg would agree that he would probably trade Clay Matthews in 1978 for Warren Moon.
I think most people would agree to that, yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is, I really believe Warren Moon didn't win a Super Bowl because he was in Houston. They wanted to run and shoot. They abandoned the run game and basically put everything on Warren Moon because that's a team that if you watch the second half, much like the Super Bowl a couple years ago with the Falcons and the Patriots, if they would have just ran the clock down and ran the ball at 35-3, they'd have won the game. But Jack Pardee and the gang decided that they wanted to just keep doing what they do, and it ended up biting them in the ass.
Yeah, I can see that. And they had some good years in Houston. They had an 11-5 season, a 10-4 year, but really, it looks like they just couldn't get over the hump. Couldn't really get to an extra level where they were one of the best teams in the league. undisputed.
Yeah, and I mean, that was because they refused to run the ball. But, all right, Sam, you can
That's what happens. You got to be able to run the ball.
What was that?
No, you got to be able to run the ball. I think you got to be able to move the ball on the field that way if you're going to win a championship, especially in the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Well, the thing is, when you're up 35-3 in the second half, just run the play clock to a second and hand the ball off, and everything will be fine as long as you're not fumbling it. So, all right, guys, we're going to wrap it up. Tomorrow, we will be back to preview all these Sunday games. Every game played on Sunday, me and Sam will pick it. I mean, we'll probably both be undefeated even if we pick different teams. But you can follow Sam Teets at Sam Teets33. You can follow me at Grilling Truth. You can hear all of our podcasts on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you find podcasts, you'll find the Grilling Truth. And you can hear us live Monday through Friday at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, Twitch, and Periscope. So for now, for Sam Teets, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.